Hey guys, welcome to another class of American and European relations. Today we're going to be talking about quite an interesting issue, that is immigration and refugee crisis. As you can see, we're going to talk about it in a comparative perspective. But before we're starting with what the class is going to be about, we're going to be talking first about migration, then about refugees, and in the second video, I'm going to talk about the comparative politics, how this issue is being handled on both sides of the Atlantic. I mean, just let me make a small remark about our current situation. And of course, it's absolutely dramatic. We're living through a crisis. But when you talk about this kind of issues, it's particularly striking that in what kind of privileged position we are in our lives. And I think it's very useful always to remember that and to appreciate what we have and to thank for what we have, because when we compare ourselves to people that are seeking for asylum at the moment, or they are waiting in a camp that is not in their country, and just think how vulnerable these people are to a pandemic as the one we are facing at the moment. So yeah, once again, this is obviously a reason to care about this kind of issues, but also another reason feel privileged and to enjoy every second of our life, even if the situations are the ones that are given at the moment, because we are very lucky, and you have to be aware of that. Once I've said that, let me go on with the class, and let me tell you a little bit about migration or refugees. And the main thing here is for you to understand these concepts are different. On the one hand, we'll have migrants. On the other hand, we'll have refugees. And then we'll talk about how the European Union and the United States deal with these issues. And if we talk about migration, I mean, this is something that has happened over history. Migration existed before even countries existed. So people moving from one area to another, I mean, for various reasons. I mean, obviously this has happened all over time. If we talk about the history of the United States, migration played a huge role. And actually we can relate this, and we'll relate this to, if we talk in constructivist terms here, we will relate this to the identity the US had, and then we can ask ourselves the question whether this identity is changing or not over the last couple of years. But yeah, and once again, Europe also was a country of migrants. Well, if we talk to the Irish, if we talk to the Spaniards, if we talk to Italians, if we talk to almost any country in the world, migration played a big role in our history. The current snapshot of migration is quite interesting. I don't know if you could predict where the main migrant flows are happening in the world, but they look like this. And this is a little bit, well, not very hard to interpret, but you can see the biggest flows. I mean, the biggest flows are within the same continent. For example, from Europe to Europe, 41 million. Within Asia, 63 million people move in every year. But then you see from Latin America to North America, we have a big chunk with 26 million. Also from Asia to Europe, 20 million, Africa to Europe. So obviously these people are moving where? They're moving to places where they can actually afford a better, to increase their quality of life. Economic reasons are the one driving these people. I mean, at some points even we can talk about starvation or the lack of resources, but the main cause when we talk about migration is an economic cause. I mean, we are moving from one place to another to try to improve our quality of life. Actually, migration also plays a big role for our societies. If we talked about North America, or we talked about Europe without migration, because of how our demographics look like and how we have aging populations, we can see that we do need migration. These two curves in each graph will be how the population will look like. I mean, what will be the change in overall population per continent with and without migration. And you can see actually the impact of migration in North America and in Europe is massive. I mean, Europe, no matter how, even with migration, we're going to be losing population in the next decades. And this is problematic for the sustainability or welfare state in our societies as we know them. But the same thing happens to the US. And actually, migrants make themselves visible. I think it was last year when in the US, migrants decided to go on a strike for a day to visualize their importance in society. And same thing in Europe. And by the end of the day, migrants mostly, if we keep looking at the demographics, we'll see that they are actually younger than the average age of the nationals of the countries they're arriving to. So that actually obviously benefits because they will be paying taxes, they will be inputting into the system, while actually the more aged population of origin in that country will probably be already benefiting from welfare. So actually not contributing, but the other way around, but taking what they actually have contributed over decades. So actually the impact of migration is important into the prospect of our demographics, and obviously if it's important for demographics, it's going to have an impact on the economy. What's the difference? Because so far we've been talking about migrants, and we've been saying that they are moving from one country to another, actually because of the economic reasons, looking for a better future for themselves and for their families, which is actually a legitimate cost to migrate. But if we're talking about refugees, we're talking about something different. If we go back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we're going back to 1948, we'll see that actually Article 14 says that everyone has a right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. And this is what a refugee is going to be, actually a person that is actually running away from a situation of persecution. How was this developed? In the Geneva Convention in 1951. It's slightly different from the Geneva Conventions of War in 1949, if I recall well. But by the end of the day, here we're talking about the fear of being persecuted. And the reasons can be very broad, from race, religion, nationality, social group, political opinion. By the end of the day, it's someone fearing that if they stay in their home country, they're going to be persecuted and their life is going to be in risk. And this is the definition of what a refugee is, and you see how it is different from the economic migrant as we've just defined it. Here we are talking about actually the life will be in risk because they're going to be persecuted. And so these two terms, they are very different. What is interesting about the Geneva Convention in 1951 that is legally binding? Every country that has signed this convention, it's committed to it, so it's committed to accept asylum seekers, refugees from other country. If a petition of asylum arrives in Spain of a person that clearly their lives are in danger because if they stay in their home country, then Spain has the obligation of accepting that person as a refugee. However, what's the problem here? That we lack enforcing mechanisms. We go back to the principles of international relation theory. We know this is an anarchic world and there's no overarching authority that will impose on us or will punish us if we don't enforce what we have agreed. What happens to Spain if it does not respect the refugee convention? Nothing. I mean, by the end of the day, it's only an internal political issue, and the government might lose face, so to say, but nothing else. There's not enforcing mechanism. However, the system works relatively okay, so to say. The European system is interesting because you know that we are part of Schengen, and we have a free movement of people within our borders since 1995. However, this does not apply to refugees. I mean, actually, Schengen only applies stricter census to nationals, so people that can legally move from one country to another. So I can move and I can benefit from Schengen. Refugee, in theory, cannot benefit from Schengen. However, people were moving because there are no border controls by the end of the day, so you can easily move from one country to another. What was the problem here? With that we have safe havens in the European Union. That we knew that we had countries that were more likely to grant us asylum, and actually were not even more likely to grant the asylum, but also to provide better living conditions to these refugees. And these were obviously, I mean, I'm sure you can guess, but these were Northern European countries. Also Germany was a safe haven for asylum seekers. So people, I mean, seeking for asylum, what will they do? Obviously, go to those countries and apply for asylum in that country. What else were they doing? These refugees they were applying in several countries. So because by the end of the day, if you were accepted in one, you were already in Schengen, you were already in Europe. So applying as many as you could, eventually one will grant you asylum. However, the European Union passed the Dublin Regulation in 2013, and this brought together the system. By the end of the day, the first thing that it did was that only one asylum petition was possible, and that asylum petition had to be in the country these refugees arrived to. However, you can imagine this was problematic, and later we're going to be talking about the refugee crisis in Europe. But this was problematic for whom? This was problematic for the border countries. I mean, we're talking that this is a problem for Greece. If refugees, are arriving from Syria, and they're all arriving through Greece, then the Greek system is going to be overwhelmed with asylum petitions. But this is how more or less how the system works nowadays in Europe. I can tell you that the three countries that have received more and grant more asylum at the moment in Europe are Germany, Italy, and Spain. And yeah, and this is pretty much the situation. It's still divergent. Each country still has its own system. This is one of the areas where cooperation is clearly necessary, seeing the events that we had with the refugee crisis and the war in Syria. What's the US approach? The US approach for a long time has been a priority system, depending on the conditions of the applicant. They go through a fast track, then there are quotas, depending on how many refugees can be accepted, and depending also on the administration, this quota relaxes or increases. It's also interesting that in the US system, and this is being researched, actually, there's much more research on refugee treatment and asylum seekers in the US than in the European Union. We can talk about what is some academics have referred to as refugee roulette. This is that actually is the likelihood of success of a asylum seeker depends mostly on the person that is in charge of that application. So the roulette, actually, those bullets in the roulettes on the roulette, actually the person that is in charge of admitting that application, the civil servant that is going to interview the civil servant that is going to analyze each case, which actually makes it very, very random who does and who does not get asylum granted in the United States. So now we're going to advance, but before I finish this video, I want to ask you this question. So before you watch the next video, how different do you think American and European approaches to immigration are? Are they very different? Aren't they? Are we more or less doing the same? Ask yourself this question, and I'll see you after the break. So see ya.